Welcome back to this week's episode of Purrfect Takes. I'm your host, Stephen Patton, joined by my dear friend and co host, Jacob Acquire. And today we got a good show for you guys. A lot of good information that kind of hit on some good Panther news, obviously, some dates to kind of keep in mind as we're kind of hitting the draft season and kind of the workouts leading up into the regular season. But before we go any further, I want Jacob to kind of take the stage, talk about beer of the week, and just how your week's been in general.
Week's been pretty good so far. It is hot outside, which is nice, but it's also I'm a cold guy, so I like the cold. So it's gonna be nicer when it cools back down around Thursday, Friday. But pretty good so far. Beer of the week is a rainbow sherbet sour from Triple C. And it's pretty. It's like really good, nice and sweet. Not super hoppy. It's more like a juice than a beer, but I think it's pretty good. And I think we're in a positive mood for this episode. Kind of a rarity with the Panthers, but we ended up after we recorded. This always seems to happen after we record. We ended up signing a big name free agent, signing Jadeveon Clowney to a 2-year deal. I think it's base 20 million over 2 years, up to 24 with incentives, but I think we no longer have a glaring need along the defensive line now between him and Wanham. And I know Kalavon Chason isn't like a star or a stud by all means, but he's good depth. If we have like, or if we have those three guys along with Derek Brown and Ashawn Robinson and Shy Tuttle, and then you add like one younger guy later in the draft, I'm pretty satisfied with the deal. I think it's better than it was last year. Um, it just obviously doesn't have the star in Brian Burns. But I mean, if you take a look at Jadeveon Clowney's stats across the board, they were better than Burns last year.
Yeah, there's a lot to like with Jadeveon Clowney. He's obviously from South Carolina, went to school at South Carolina, had that huge play in the bowl game against Michigan that kind of made him the number one
Ball
pick
don't
to
lie.
Houston. Yeah, it doesn't lie. That was one of the most iconic ball don't lie moments. He's a star. He's a stud. Since his time with the Texans, he has yet to sign a multi-year extension. Every deal he's had since his rookie deal has been a 1 year deal. He went with the Seattle Seahawks, Tennessee Titans, Browns for 2 years. Those were two separate 1 year deals. And then last year he was with the Ravens. And typically he waits to sign. He didn't wait to sign this year. He's excited about coming home. He's got different priorities now that he's got a wife and kids, and he wants to be home. And that's really cool that we can have him in the building. Like you said, maybe we don't have the star power that we had with Burns last year, but what's nice about this D line, we had Ashawn Robinson, we had Jadeveon Clowney, we already had Derek Brown. All those guys are great in the run. And so now we have a little bit more depth. We don't have to rely on or lean on some of the younger guys on the defense, like a DJ Johnson or Amari Barno. And we can allow those guys to play more situationally, which may lend themselves to their skill set and what they can do for us on defense. So I'm really excited about how the D line is shaping up. Question is with Jadeveon Clowney coming back, are they going to be able to convince Stephon Gilmore to come back? Because I think bringing him back would help solidify the secondary room. I definitely think if, and we talked about this last week, if Kool-Aid McKinstry is there at 33, you got to take a guy like that to help bolster that back end. Because if we had JC Horn and he stays healthy and then we had Kool-Aid on the other side, like you're locking down guys week in and week out. And then that just puts so much pressure on the offense to perform and kind of in between kind of the middle of the field. And that would allow us to kind of put more bodies there depending on zone coverages or if we're playing different just areas of the field. And that's something that plays itself in the Evero's hand. So I know I rambled on a little bit, but if we bring in Gilmore, that'll pair nicely with another guy we brought back, Sam Franklin. What did you like about Sam Franklin's game last year and why he warranted the 1 year deal he got?
Well, he's our special teams captain, right? He's the enforcer. He makes a ton of tackles. He's really good in punt coverage as well. He actually played pretty like decently well when he had to step in at safety last year as well. I know earlier in his career when Matt Rule was the coach, we kind of made fun of Sam Franklin when he had to come in because he wasn't the best along the back end, but he's improved a ton and he's great on special teams. And we also brought back Raheem Blackshear, our kick returner, on a 1 year deal. And I kind of have to think that both of these guys are going to have a bigger role rather with the new kickoff rules. I think that's going to lend itself a lot more to the returner. And Raheem Blackshear, when he was on the field last year, I believe led the league in kickoff return, like yards per return. So I'm super excited to see how that turns out with both of those guys being back. And you talked about Clowney maybe convincing Gilmore to come home, another South Carolina guy. We signed DJ Wanham too, who played at South Carolina. So it seems like we're getting some local flavor all along the back end there. And we'll get to it a little bit later in the episode. But with the linebackers, the second level, there might be some local flavor that we draft there as well. But I'm super excited about the signings and re-signings that happened last week. We're kind of at the end of all the exciting stuff in free agency. First wave is definitely gone. Second wave is drying up here. There's still a couple big names out there like Justin Simmons and a lot of the safeties and stuff, but I don't really foresee the Panthers making any more big signings, if at all, until like after June 1, where it doesn't affect the compensatory picks.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point to bring up. If Gilmore is signed, or even Justin Simmons are signed to very inexpensive 1 year deals, kind of like they're trying to stay in the NFL. Both those players are in their 30s at this point in their career. I could definitely see that being something we get done before June 1st, just to have them in OTAs. But a guy like Justin Simmons, he's already been in Evero's system. A guy like Gilmore, great all round player. This guy won a Defensive Player of the Year award. He's won a Super Bowl. He knows what he has to bring to the table to compete. So, again, not too worried about bringing those guys on board right away. But speaking of kind of these things that are coming up, and things that we're going to want our players showing up at, first day is April 8th. So a couple days away. What is it? Less than a week, that next Monday.
Yeah, Monday. Yeah.
And then voluntary mini camp will kind of be held right around the time of the draft. That'll be April 23rd to the 25th. And then we lead into the OTA off-season workouts. So got a bunch in May to end kind of that month, and then top of June, and then that's when you get into the mini camp days. And before we know it, we're going to be in training camp and then preseason. So everything's kind of starting to kick off, and it feels like we're back in that wave of being optimistic about our team and where we can go. And hopefully we can kind of mitigate that over the course of this offseason, and not keep our hopes up too high, but keep them as realistic as possible.
Well, I'm gonna get my hopes up. Don't worry. Whatever day we end up going to training camp, which is in Charlotte for the first time, by the way, so that'll be nice not to have to
That'll be
drive
a paid event.
all the way down to. It'll be paid, but I kind of like not having to drive on those, let's say, less than up to code South Carolina roads. Um, so that'd be nice just to drive down the street and go to the stadium and watch or wherever it is. But training camp will be nice, and yeah, we're really getting into the swing of the off season, especially with the draft coming up here. And with the draft in mind, something we've been doing since last week has been doing a little thread on our 30 visit, I guess, participants or visitors so far, or like the ones that have been announced so far, like doing a little blurb about them, what we like about their game, a couple plays and stuff like that. So I figured we should probably talk about each one that's been confirmed so far, and what we like about them, and where we hope to get them, things like that. And I kind of want to kick it off with one of my favorite players in the draft, and that's Ben Sinnott, the Kansas State tight end. He's really like a fullback tight end hybrid, just does everything well, contested catches, good blocker, and he's a guy that both of us have raved about, and like both really want on the team. Hopefully we're able to get him there at the what, pick 65 that we have, something like that, but he would be a welcome addition to our team considering the tight end room has been less than adequate the past, like, what, 5 6 years, ever since Greg Olson's last foot injury.
Yeah, we haven't had juice at that position since, like you said, Greg Olson. What I love about Ben Sinnott is that he models his game after Kyle Juszczyk, a fullback, kind of like that role that you were talking about, and George Kittle. And it's amazing to watch what he can do on tape. This guy is great in the run game. He's a good route runner. He's got great hands, and he's phenomenal in terms of the athlete he is. So when you look at the relative athletic score, he scored a 9.72. I think that's the second best in this draft class, behind Theo Johnson out of Penn State. And Theo Johnson, Penn State in general, is just known for putting out athletic tight ends. So that's no knock on Ben Sinnott there, but yeah, I think he's our tight end two in this draft class behind Brock Bowers. He's projected to be in the hundreds range, and I just don't see it. I think if we want Ben Sinnott on this team, we need to take him at 65, or if we trade back in the second round and we are able to collect another third this year, that would be the pick we spend on him.
Yeah, for sure. Out of all the guys here on the list that we're about to talk about, he's the one that I want the most. He's kind of what we envisioned, or what they kind of sold us on Tommy Tremble being, like that hybrid guy that can block really well and run routes out of the backfield. I think that's what Sonata is able to do. And then we also have quite a few other pass catchers that have come in or will come in for their 30 visits. And we'll kick it off with Xavier Worthy, the speed demon from Texas, fastest guy in combine history. He's going to bring the speed and the juice that the receiver room was lacking last year if we do end up drafting him. I think he might go in the first round. I think you're a bit higher on where, or not higher, but you think he's going to go higher in the draft than I think he will. But super good player. I don't think he's just like the other speedy guys like Ruggs or John Ross either. I think he has real receiver ability to his game.
I think he does too. When you look at how he runs routes, his concept of space, what he does with the ball in his hands once he catches it, there's a lot to like about his game. But I think the thing that clues me in on why he would be taken within the top 15 picks is John Ross. He was taken ninth overall. I believe Henry Ruggs was taken like what 12th
He was
overall.
11, I believe. Yeah,
So no, he was 12th in the
or was he?
2020 draft. Yeah, he
Or you
was.
you might be right. I think he was 12th. Yeah.
Yeah. And then Ted Ginn, he was ninth overall. And granted, Ted Ginn was many, many moons ago. But one of the things that some more picky, I would say, analysts would say is where these hands are definitely questionable. He catches a lot more with his body. And I don't know if it's because he hasn't been put in a situation where he needs to catch with his hands, but that's just one of those things that, okay, should we have any concerns about this player, his profile? That's one thing that kind of jumps out. But all of those guys that I just mentioned that were speed demons that could just tear it up in terms of stretching a field, all those guys were taken within the 15 picks, and some of those guys were top 10 picks. So I don't know if he's better than a lot of the wide receivers we've talked about, but because of those attributes and because of the history that we've seen prior in the NFL, I wonder if he'll be a first round talent and if he'll be within the top 15.
Yeah, speaking of Henry Ruggs and the Raiders, that just reminds me that the Raiders could also use some receiver juice, and they pick 13th, so that could be a spot there, or maybe Indy at 15. So I think it's certainly possible. I currently have him, I think, like around 20 to Pittsburgh, but I think he could certainly be a top 15, top 10 pick, just because the speed's the one thing you can't teach, right? That's
Yep.
why somebody like Tyreek Hill is so valuable to the Dolphins and formerly the Chiefs offense and stuff like that. So it'll be interesting to see where he ends up. Hopefully, he pushes some other receivers out of the first round, which we'll talk about closer to the draft. But another Texas guy with a top 30 visit here is Jonathan Brooks, their running back, who we both have as RB1 in this draft. I think a lot of people do. He's just really can do it all. Can catch out of the backfield. Decent blocker, not the best, but really a good cutter, good speed, just a good all around back. And you could always use somebody like that, especially considering Chuba Hubbard is on his final year of his rookie deal. And I believe Miles Sanders, after this season, no longer has guaranteed money on the contract. And I can see his contract being one that we want to get off of in the future. So we may sneakily have a hole at running back here soon. So you always got to consider that.
You do. And a lot of people think that you got to draft for current needs. And I think some of the best teams that draft are always drafting for future needs and being aware of those. So, Jonathan Brooks, he's coming off an ACL injury. He's probably not going to be 100% week one, but it's one of those things. He's got so much talent. When I watch the tape, and it's hard, maybe it's just they both wore 24. Well, Devontae Freeman did with the Atlanta Falcons, but it's just the way they kind of play their game. They're a little bit shifty. They're still a little bit bigger. They can maul you in the run game. They can get around you in the run game. There's a lot to like about what they do. I think one thing that's should be highlighted about Brooks' game is that he's a little bit slow to the hole, and that was one thing that made Le'Veon Bell really, really special at the next level. Is that just hesitation and waiting for the offensive line to do their part and then just shoot the gap, shoot that hole. And he does that really, really well. And if he's a guy that we're considering at the end of day two, top of day three, he's there in day three, say at what do you pick? Like pick 100, pick 101. If he's there, I think you take him. And I think that's a guy that you stash. And like you said, we probably cut Sanders next year, and maybe we extend Chuba to like a 1-2 year team friendly deal. And that's how we kind of move forward with the running back room. So I definitely like to see that. The next couple guys that we have on this list are wide receivers. The first one is Brendan Rice out of USC. He was kind of Caleb Williams' number one guy this past year. He's son of Jerry Rice. He runs routes very angrily. He has been kind of comped as like Isaiah Pacheco in terms of just his aggressive nature with just in and out of breaks and just getting after it. He's a guy that doesn't quit on a play. He hustles a lot, and that's something to admire. And again, if that's a guy that's there on day four and we can get him in the fifth or sixth round, I think that's a guy you want in the locker room. I think that's a guy that would be perfect with Amir Smith Marset and kind of push guys like Jonathan Mingo to be their best selves. And that's somebody you always want from a depth standpoint. So I don't know what your thoughts are on him, but I do like him as kind of like a backup option, especially with how thin our wide receiver room is currently.
Yeah, I think the Panthers definitely need to double dip at receiver in this draft. One of them early, and then a guy like Brendan Rice, maybe round four, round five, like you're talking about. What I really like about him is that he tracks the ball well in the air on deep shots. I can't think of how many, or I can think of a ton of times last year where a certain receiver who shall remain nameless, he was a free agent that we brought in last season, would have a ball thrown to him perfectly, I might add. And he just wouldn't get his hands up, or it would hit him in the face mask, or he would just drop it. And I think Brendan Rice isn't going to do any of those things. I think when it's there in front of him or there over his shoulder, he's going to bring it in. And that's kind of something you need, especially with a young ascendant quarterback. Another angry receiver. I'm not sure angry route runner is a compliment that people think it is, but another angry runner with the ball in his hands as receiver is Malachi Corley, and this is your guy in the draft. I know you're really big on him. I like him as well. He's a yak machine, not necessarily due to his speed, but I think when we talked about the receivers, I said this line verbatim: "He'll run right through you," and that's kind of something we need. That's the Dan Morgan "We need dogs" mantra. He's a dog, and I feel like that's going to appeal to a lot of people in the building, and I know it's appealed to a ton of people across the league because I think I saw that he had 21 team visits lined up before this draft. So obviously he's getting a ton of attention, and that's kind of that's the kind of player, not just receiver, but kind of player the Panthers need because they were a little soft last year.
I think my only issue with Corley, and you brought it up, I am high on him. He's a guy that like he's just reminiscent of Steve Smith. He'll run through your face mask, and you want a dog like that in your room. And we started our top 30 visits off with him as kind of the top guy. And there's a lot to love about his game, but I question kind of the extensiveness of his route tree. I do question a little bit his ability to separate compared to guys that'll be a little bit later, like a Jacob Coing out of Arizona. And so you just wonder if that's going to be the guy that's going to help Bryce out a lot, or if he's just going to be like a LaVisca Chenault 2.0. And that's nothing against Chenault, but I don't know if that's a guy that you want to spend a top 100 pick on. And I think he's going to go in the top 100. And I was talking with a guest, and he's going to be an honorary host here with how frequently we have him on over the coming months. But Dylan Jackson said he'd be perfect in like a Shanahan offense. Would love to see him in Miami or San Francisco, heck, even Detroit with the Lions. Just some of the stuff that they do of getting some of their receivers out in space and letting them do work. So I think why I like him as a prospect, I don't know if I like him for our team as much. I think that's a guy that I just would want to pick up in a fantasy league or watch highlights and watch him play at the next level. And that's nothing against him. I think he's a great player. If he was in Carolina, I'd root for him. I'd pull for him. That's just my 2 cents.
Yeah, I feel ya. He feels kind of gadgety at the moment, and until because he had a running back background as well, and until you beat the gadget player allegations, I kind of don't. want you to be a staple on the offense. It's similar to how I felt about Mingo last year. To be quite honest, I thought he played a lot like Chenault did when he was in college. Mingo played a lot of wing back his final year of Ole Miss, which is where the receiver lines up like 3 yards behind and to the right or left of the quarterback and kind of runs out of the backfield. I just want a prototypical receiver. And nothing against Corley. I think he'll be great at the next level. But like you said, if we're going to be drafting a receiver high, he needs to be a real receiver.
Yep.
And that's something we'll get into once we get closer to the draft, like when we have our mock draft episode or something like that. We also had a couple of defensive 30 visits. We'll get to the two linebackers when we talk about linebackers at the end of the episode, but one of them that wasn't a linebacker was Marshawn Nealand, the edge rusher from Western Michigan. He's kind of I know a lot of people call him an outside backer. I think he's more of a like an even front defensive end or an odd front
Yep.
defensive end. I think he's a bit slower, bigger body. I think he could play alongside of like Ashawn Robinson and like be sandwiched between him and Clowney or him and Wanham or something like that. But I like his strength mainly. He's a pile pusher. He has a good bull rush, a strong motor, so he plays throughout the play, and he is able to line up across the line. I just think he's better at doing so closer to over the tackle rather than like wide nine or out further over the tight end.
Yeah, he doesn't have the speed to play like out there wide on the edge. He would work best, I think, as a 3-4 defensive end, where he's able to take up space. But because he's a little bit more undersized as like a defensive tackle, to be able to kind of play more that 3 tech role. So I could see him playing what YGM was supposed to play last year up until he was kind of getting hurt and just dealing with injuries, of just a guy that can fit the run very well, still played a very high level. Like you said, he's got a great motor. What I enjoyed when I turned on the tape when his time with Western Michigan was like he'd almost like stand up, leaning over the A gap and almost be like a blitzer. It was very Miles Garrett esque in that standpoint of just he could line up all over, cause havoc, and he made some really good tackles. I want to say in the passing game, there were different screens or different slant routes that would come across, and he'd kind of get off the blocker and make a tackle. And that's exactly to your point, and I've already said this already, but that motor, just you play until the whistle blows. And you want those kind of guys in your team. You want guys that aren't going to quit on a play, because that's infectious. When you have quitters on the team, that's infectious as well. So you want to build kind of that mentality, that culture, and that's a guy that I think can help establish that. So, like you said, we'll talk about the two linebackers when we break down the linebacker section. The two that we'll be looking at that have visits that we'll be looking at within the top five are Edgerrin Cooper out of Texas A&M and Peyton Wilson out of North Carolina State. So, do you want to touch on either of those guys before we move into mock draft scenarios for the Panthers?
No. Well, let's get right into the mock drafts. We're in draft month officially now. It feels like it's been forever. 23 days and I don't know, like 3.5, 4 hours away from the official draft start time. Counting it down like it's Christmas, but yeah, it's draft season. So I think it's time to do some mock drafts. I think we talked about it before the pod where we can each do a mock and then kind of explain. Uh, at each pick what the scenario is, if there's trades or anything like that, and what we choose to do. And I think that's a really good idea, just to see kind of the differences in our philosophies. So, like when we're talking about drafts and stuff like that, so we can kind of understand each other from a draft standpoint. And I see,
Yeah.
yeah, I see you're almost at pick 33 now. I'll kick it off. I got to pick 33, and there's a trade with the Patriots that they offered trade back one pick and get their third next year. And so I took that, and with that pick, I'm going to take Adonai Mitchell, who is available, the receiver out of Texas.
Adonai Mitchell. That's if he's there at 33, it would be hard for me even to move back one pick because the Patriots have a lot of holes on their roster. So if they go, say, Drake May at 3, and then, for instance, they have Adonai Mitchell there at 30, if they move up one, why wouldn't they take him there? And for me, if he's there, there's no reason for me to move back if I'm Dan Morgan. So I wouldn't move back in that scenario if Adonai Mitchell is still on the board. Was McKinstry still available for you, or any of the other cornerbacks that we talked about last week?
I believe DeJean was the only available corner out of the group that we had talked about. Actually, Lassiter went right after my pick, but no, the two Bama guys and Nate Wiggins and Quinyon Mitchell all went in the first round, and so I had to kind of go with my guy Adonai Mitchell there. It's
Yeah, no,
interesting
absolutely.
though. At pick 33, and we had talked about this beforehand. I think we're more likely to trade 33 because let's say Michael Penix or Bo Nix don't go in the first round. Teams are gonna want to have that pick in the second round to ensure that hey, we need to get our guy. Let's say Denver doesn't get either of them, and like, or if they miss out on McCarthy and Drake May and Jaden Daniels, they're like, all right, we got to get a guy. Maybe they trade up. Maybe the Raiders if they miss out on a guy, or maybe a team like the Cowboys who have Dak Prescott's contract coming up, where they can't tag him, can't trade him, and he's going to be a free agent. And Jerry Jones has said as much that yeah, we know he needs an offer, but we're not giving it to him right now. Maybe they want to get a QB of the future. So I think that 33 is up for grabs for a lot of teams if they want to trade up and get a QB.
Absolutely. I think those are a lot of great points. And the mock draft simulator I just did, Adonai Mitchell got taken by the Eagles, which I have him going to the Eagles as well in my mock draft. I think he's too good of a talent to fall out of the first round. And looking at kind of the board, I have a trade offer from the Giants where I send pick 33 and 240. And in return, I get pick 38 and 106 from the Giants. And so that's something that we just already traded with them that only moves us back 5 spots. And Adonai Mitchell is no longer there. So I'm not super high on some of the interior offensive line guys at pick 33. I don't think some of the edge guys are super great there. And I think Ladd might actually be there at 38. So I'm going to accept this trade from the Giants. I'm going to move back. And we're going to pick at 38 and 39. So sure enough, Ladd McConkey is still there. I'm going to take him with pick 38. And then with pick 39, let's see who we have available. A lot of the quarterbacks are still there. Do we go offensive line? I don't really like any of these guys. Bartonelli's there, but I feel like that's a guy that we should wait for, like pick 65. Maybe we go wide receiver again. This is a strat that I've done before. So we took Ladd McConkey. And now with this one, I think I'm going to go Jalen Polk out of Washington. This guy is a dog, according to Steve Smith. He's a great route runner. I think there's a lot to like about his game. He can play more that outside X role. And that's something that's huge, especially when we already have Deontay Johnson. We draft Ladd McConkey, who's going to play a similar role in that respect of just a route runner who can get open, create separation. So with my 2 picks in the second round, we go wide receiver. Who did you have the Panthers taking at 39? Any draft strategies here? I know you already moved back from 33 to 34. Is this a pick you're looking to move back for? Or do you think there's somebody there that we should take and not kind of lose the opportunity of getting?
Well, the board that I had, I didn't really like anybody there, and Pittsburgh called me and offered me 51, so their second rounder, and a second next year for it was 39 and I believe pick 140, and I accepted that just because number one, we don't have a second next year currently. Number two, I think that's good value, and so I ended up at pick 51. And looking around the board, I have Jalen Polk there as well, who I'm very tempted to take. Let's see. But ooh, Ben Sonata is also calling my name, but I think I am going
At
to go with
39.
51.
Oh,
Because I
51.
traded back
Yep,
with
my
the
bad. Yeah, you
Steelers.
did.
Yeah.
You did. Yep.
Um, I think I'm going to do something a bit unconventional, and I think I'm going to take a guy that we'll end up talking about in a couple of weeks, Tyvondre Sweat, the defensive tackle out of
Okay.
Texas, because
I
I like what
I
he's
like
able to
that.
do. He's massive as well, so that'll move Ashawn Robinson to another 3 tech, Derek Brown 3 tech, have him in there, but it also gives us some depth there, and I think somebody of his size with his movement ability is hard to pass up. So that's what I went with there at pick 51. But after that, I'm probably done with trades. I made 2 trades, and I'm happy with the capital I got.
Yeah. No, you collected a couple picks. That's huge, especially with a team with a lot of needs. I like the Sweat pick. I think he's a top 50 player. So for us to get him at 51, and like you said, the flexibility on that defensive line just increases. It gives us some depth if there's injuries along that. For me, I did not trade back, so I don't have another pick in the second round. So we're both, I think, at the top of the third now with pick 65. And I'm looking at guys that are available. And this is a guy I keep coming back to. I don't understand how in some mocks he's available in the hundreds. For Pro Football Network, the simulator that we're both using, Ben Sinnott is ranked 61. So he technically fell a little bit. And you know what? We didn't have a lot of weapons on the offense. I love his versatility. He brings a lot for us to transition to 12 personnel and maybe make it look like we're running the ball when we're actually throwing the ball, and have receivers on the field that have that versatility that both can block and catch the ball. So I'm going Ben Sinnott here. We've been raving about him. That's my guy.
Yeah, I went Sonata as well. It's too hard for me to pass him up. I think he's incredibly versatile, and will. I like your point about 12 personnel. Last year, one of the things that plagued us, especially when it was Frank Reich calling the plays and stuff like that, was 11 personnel, like only 11 personnel, and it was the same five. Well, he might switch the running back occasionally, but it was the same group of receivers, same tight end, stuff like that. No, like stagnation, no differences, anything like that. So even if we're an 11 personnel team primarily, which I think most teams are, we'll be able to mix and match if we add Ben Sinnott. So I like that there. At 101, I'm actually going to grab another receiver in Jermaine Burton. Played with Bryce Young for a year at Alabama. I think he's a guy that's underrated in this process. I think he'd be a lot higher if he didn't have a lot of his antics on the field. Like he talks a lot. He gets into it with a couple of receivers and stuff like that, or a couple DBs. I mean, and he had a case of like the fumbles early this past year, but he's cleaned it up. And I think if you go back and watch games like Texas A&M, like Georgia, he really shines. And I think he'd be good depth in the receiver room.
I like that. My only question is, was Javon Baker available there at that pick? And if so, why did you take Burton over Baker?
I like what Burton can do to stretch the field.
Okay.
I do think Baker was there. He's not there at the next pick, but I like the number one, the chemistry that he and Bryce already have. That's always something. That's always something huge. You look at what the Texans did. Stroud told him on day two, "Hey, go draft Tank Dell," and they did it. And look how it worked out. Tank Dell had a phenomenal rookie season before he got injured. So I think you gotta, if your quarterback kind of leans one way for a guy, I think you kind of need to acquiesce, especially if you have a younger quarterback who needs all the help he can get.
I like that. And so top of round four, because I traded back with the Giants in the mock simulator that I'm looking at, I have pick 101 and 106. For me, I'm just going to stay on the offensive side. I've liked what we've done in free agency on the defense. I was a little bit scared when Brian Burns, YGM, they either left in free agency, got traded, and we all of a sudden lost Frankie Louvu as well. Lost a lot of pieces on that front seven. But for me, bringing in Josie Jewell, Ashawn Robinson, we bring in Jadeveon Clowney, not as worried about that anymore. And so I'm going to go running back, actually. Blake Corum, Bucky Irving, both available guys that you have higher than the guy that I'm going to take. But I like Aldrich Estime out of Notre Dame. I think this guy is just a bruiser downfield. It brings that element of what we had with Deontay Foreman and Chuba Hubbard 2 years ago, where it's like thunder and lightning. And it almost gives you like a light version of that double trouble that we had in the late 2000s, early 2010s. And I don't want to pass up on that. I think that's just an element of that wears on you throughout a game. It takes a little bit of stress off Bryce. There were a lot of short yardage situations that we had last year that we couldn't convert, and he would be the guy that convert those yards. I know it was a running joke with Ezekiel Elliott where it's like, if you need 5 yards, Zeke is going to get you three. If you need 2 yards, Zeke is going to get you three. Like, to me, that's this kind of player where it's just he's going to get those couple yards regardless of the down and situation. And sometimes you need guys in certain situations, 3rd and 1, 4th and 1, that just can go get you a bucket. So I'm taking him at 101. And then at 106, have a trade offer from the Seahawks. I'm going to pass up because I like some of the guys that are available in the interior offensive line. I have Tanner Bertinelli that we talked about earlier. I thought it was a little too high to grab him, obviously in the second round. But that was really the only guy I liked on the board then. He's still there. I'm going to take him. help reinforce that interior offensive line that we addressed in free agency. And all of a sudden, I think the offense that was a weakness, we had two pass catchers, we had a tight end that has some versatility, and then we had one of the most athletic interior offensive linemen in this draft. I think we're cooking now. I think we are cooking heading into the fifth round. So who do you have in the fifth at pick 141?
All right, so 141 is my final pick because I traded away all the low picks for future picks in those earlier trades. I ended up with New England's third next year and Pittsburgh's second next year. So I'm okay with losing the sixth or fifth and seventh round picks that we have. So I'm taking at pick 141, edge rusher out of Utah, Jonah Ellis. He's a guy that we'll end up talking about next week when we do edge rushers. I thought he was very underrated compared to consensus boards. He's up there for me. I think he's like my edge seventh or sixth or seventh. I think he's a good edge. Like number one, he's good against the run. He can set the edge, strong motor, and he has very violent hands that he's able to like kind of beat down and get around offensive linemen rather than using speed or bend or anything like that. I think you need a guy like that who does the dirty work, especially when our edge rushers last year were Burns, who is I don't want to say he's a pure pass rusher, but he's kind of a turnstile in the run game. And then on the other end, Iturgos Matos, YGM, while he was pretty good versus the run, he didn't offer much as a pass rusher. I think Jonah Ellis is somewhere in the middle. He does both things better than each of the other ones did the weak things. So I think with him, I also added Tyvondre Sweat. You add that with Clowney, DJ Wanham, Ashawn Robinson. Our D line has remade and is now like a premium strength of our team. We got Pittsburgh's second rounder next year, New England's third rounder, and we add three weapons in Adonai Mitchell, Ben Sinnott, Jermaine Burton for Bryce. I am very satisfied with my draft.
I like it. I like exactly what you addressed. You got some defensive players, something that I haven't done with my approach. I think it's still smart to load up on that side of the ball. And with Dan Morgan being the general manager, there's undoubtedly going to be a inkling towards that side of the ball. I feel like he's going to want to get defensive players at some of these picks. So overall, good thought process. Trading back in order to get future picks and a draft where we'll have our first round pick, but we aren't going to have next year's second. So we get the Steelers second, we get the Patriots third. Those could be mid to maybe even earlier picks in those rounds. So that would be huge. Right now at 141, 42, these are the last two picks of the draft for me because I traded the seventh round to the Giants to move back and get that extra pick at 106. I'm gonna go offense again because of the guy that's available. We talked about earlier on the podcast how Ben Sinnott is one of the most athletic tight ends in this class. The RAS or relative athletic score translates really well for tight end prospects. And believe it or not, Theo Johnson's there at 141. So not a big believer in Tommy Trumbull, not a big believer in Ian Thomas. Ian Thomas especially, I think his time should be done and over with, even though he took a pay cut this offseason. But we add that, we add a little bit of juice, a little bit more versatility. We'll probably carry like four tight ends into the season. And then with 142, I'll actually go defense. And this is a guy that we talked about a little bit last week, but I like him behind Troy Hill, and that's Daquan Hardy. Daquan Hardy out of where does he play? Penn
Penn
State.
State.
So taking him, love that. Like I said, hopefully we sign Gilmore and we kind of round out that secondary room. And honest to goodness, I'm happy about what we did in this draft because we added the stars that I felt like would make movements on the offensive side that are going to make plays. Lad McConkey out of Georgia getting open, Jalen Polk just being a dog on the perimeter, Ben Sinnott and Theo Johnson being active in the run and pass game, having Audric Estime and Tanner Bortonelli kind of solidify the run game. Those are just elements that I think are going to just add layers to what Canales is putting in this offseason. Whether or not that's what happens is yet to be seen, but it's something that I like and I'm happy with so far.
Yeah, I like both of our approaches. I was a little more balanced, and you were more load in the offense, which I get. Offense is more important than defense, and especially looking at what happened last year, offense should be much more important than defense in the offseason for us. But I like what we did. We would get into around the NFL, but not really anything happened this week, so should probably just go right into the linebackers in this class. Starting off with a guy we alluded to, we talked about him in passing a little bit. Peyton Wilson, the linebacker, stud linebacker from NC State, who has gotten an endorsement from probably the greatest Panther defender ever in Luke Kuechly, who said that should be our first draft pick that we're able to do this year. Um, I think if his medical history weren't there, I'd be on board with him. Wilson has had double digit surgeries throughout his football career, but if you and you do have to take that into account. It's very real. It's something that he has gone through. But if you just watch the tape, you kind of see Luke Kuechly on the field. This guy is all over the field, super rangy. He's a final frame player. It's what I mentioned when I was talking about safeties. He's in the final frame of each play, like he's always there. Strong tackler, good vision, sniffs out plays really well. He actually has value as a pass rusher and a sack guy. And the cut up we put out today, you'll see that he really terrorized the Louisville quarterback Jake Plummer when they played this year. He's the green dot. He sets the defenses on the field. Super athletic. But yeah, it's just if you can get past the medicals and convince yourself that he's going to play a long time, you're all the way in on him, which is what I am. But if you're super, if you do have a hesitation, which a lot of teams do, because the draft really is a large example of risk management, and if you're more risk averse, then Wilson's not going to be on your board.
Yeah. I think the biggest thing is when you start looking through that injury history, it was upper body injuries to start his career, then it was shoulder issues, then it was more upper body, and he missed a game or two there. But his production still at the college level, despite all these injuries and the concern from a medical standpoint. This guy racked up 138 tackles last year, 6 sacks, and 3 picks. And out of the top 5 guys that we have, none of them had interceptions. So it just shows prowess he has in the pass game and understanding where he needs to be in coverage and impact there. From a sack standpoint, there's only 2 guys with 5 or more sacks on this list, and one of those guys really plays weak side off, like off ball linebacker, almost rushes the quarterback sometimes. So plus there. And then he's the only guy on this list that we're talking about with over 100 tackles. And so it's just like you said, he's always there in the final frame. I had a question here, but you kind of already answered it. Like, is this guy the next Luke Kuechly? And I think really, if he were to stay healthy at the next level, he would kind of put himself kind of in that era because he's just that good of a playmaker. And obviously it's kind of hard to compare a NFL prospect coming in through the draft to a future Hall of Famer, but this guy plays just at a very, very high level. And I think there's a lot to love about his game. I mean, he was talking to Thomas Davis at the NFL Combine, getting advice from him. Obviously, he's talked with Luke Kuechly and got advice from him on how to play the game, how to play the position. And there's just a lot to like about him. His raw athletic score was 9.89, so really, really good on that front. He's just a stud, and there, you can talk all day about what he brings to the field. Again, it's just going to come back to how do teams evaluate those medicals? Because I don't think if he had a medical concern, this is a guy we're talking about going in the first round. Like that's the kind of talent this guy brings to the field. And from a consensus standpoint, he ranked second, but on your board, on my board, he's number one just because of the abundance of talent that he puts out on the film.
Yeah, you talked about if his medicals weren't a thing, how high he would go. I think he'd be a top 20 pick. I have him right now on my big board at 26th, so just outside of the top 25 thread that we're doing, counting down until the draft. But man, if you take those medicals away, it'd be hard to keep him out of the top 10. And I know linebacker is a D value, or off-ball linebacker is a D value position, but he's just insane. Like just go watch Peyton Wilson film, you won't be disappointed. The next guy that we have on the list is national champion winner this past year, Junior Colson from Michigan. And the thing I like about him is, well, a couple things I like about him. Super disciplined, strong tackler, so you're not really going to get past him. He doesn't make too many mistakes. Good vision, physical, rangy, just like Wilson is, able to get all over the field. The only big hangup that I have about him, and this was something I noticed in the national championship game, is he can be hesitant or tentative. Like instead of wanting to not make a mistake that can put him like half a step behind or something like that. And so sometimes when a read is there or a fit is there. Sometimes he's just going to need to go for it at the next level. But other than that, I think he's a very strong prospect overall. Linebacker 2 for me, and is at 51 on my big board, so just outside the top 50, but super good player. I think the game to really watch with him is Ohio State. He's shown in that game.
I think you made a lot of great points. He's the 33rd team's top linebacker in this class. He's the heaviest linebacker out of the top guys that we're talking about at 238. He plays, I know you said he hesitates a lot, but he plays robot well, which is pretty much you rotate and run. You're chasing a point on the field when there's like I want a deep cross or like a post route from the tight end, and he played it well on a few of the snaps I was watching out of him. So that's good to know in terms of like how he plays in coverage. And he's a good tackler with instincts. He may be a little slow, like Jacob said, but this is overall a really good linebacker that's going to translate well at the next level. He played on a national championship team, so he knows how to play ball to win games, and that's what you want when you're building a culture, is having those guys that have the right mindset, that were leaders on their prior teams, that had a lot of success and know how to do that moving forward. So we're moving into Edgerrin Cooper, a guy that also had, so Peyton Wilson had a team visit, top 30 visit, even though he's a local in-state guy. We also had one with the prospect out of Texas A&M and Edgerrin Cooper. I think he has phenomenal impact as like a pass rusher. He had 8.5 sacks, more sacks than any of the guys that we're talking about on this list. He does play weak side linebacker. The other two guys are more Mikes. I have questions about his ability to fit the run. And what I mean by that, it's not that he can't make tackles in the run game, it's that he's not in the position he should be. He's great at slipping underneath a tackle or a guard to get in the position to make the actual tackle. But when you're trying to fit certain run gaps, I don't know if you can be as loose as he is at the next level without some of these guys making you pay. Like you go up against guys like Christian McCaffrey, Derrick Henry, some of these guys, Saquon Barkley, some of these guys that are really, really good at their position and their craft, they're going to make you pay for that stuff. And so that has me concerned with him at the next level. What do you like about his game? Do you think he's a fit for the Panthers? Clearly, Dan Morgan saw something that he liked, that he wanted to bring him to Charlotte. Do you see what he's seen?
Yeah, I see what he sees. First of all, talked about this with safeties and corners. He's a hitter. He's gonna
Yep.
put you down if he's coming at you and you get in front of him. He also has good backfield vision, and that lends itself to his sack ability. I think he had 8 sacks this year, so obviously able to get into the backfield, wreak some havoc there. He's good in pursuit of the ball carrier as well. Like he takes good angles, but to your point, uh, what I wrote down in his like weaknesses tab here, not good as a quick mover, trips over himself. So like he isn't the most fluid mover, and I think that comes into play when you talk about his run fitting. Like he doesn't take the direct path into the backfield or something like that, or he tries to avoid rather than to invite contact in terms of like getting onto blockers, which is interesting because I think as a tackler he's a hard hitter, but and like trying to avoid contact, he trips over himself a little bit. Like that's the things you want to clean up there. It's kind of the same thing with Colson where he was hesitant. I don't think Cooper's as hesitant. I think he just his upper body and lower body aren't tied together as much as you want, and he might misstep or like step on his own foot or something like that, and that's going to put him behind in the run game. Which and you were talking about McCaffrey and Derrick Henry and stuff like that. I think guys like Kyron Williams who are able to move quickly and
Yep.
hit people, I think that's gonna be a problem for him as well if that's not something he improves upon early in his career. But all that aside, I think he's a really good versatile linebacker prospect. And you talked about him being more on the weak side and being able to rush the passer. Something that Luvu did early in his tenure with the Panthers was stuff like that. So I think he does have a role in the NFL. I think it's just going to take him a little bit longer to adjust than guys like Peyton Wilson and Junior Colson. But yes, still super strong prospect, and I can see why Dan Morgan wants to bring him in. He hits people.
Yeah, no, having guys that can just thump dudes. I mean, at the end of Dan Morgan's time with the Panthers, we drafted Thomas Davis out of Georgia, and he's probably, like in recent memory, probably been one of the biggest hitters in Panthers history. And so just having guys like that just set the tone, because like you see some of those hits and just like as a wide receiver, you don't really want to go across the middle. Like there's just there's that mindset of like you hesitate a little bit, and sometimes taking that hesitation is the difference between making a play and not making a play. So having a guy like that on the field is always huge. Next guy on this list, we have JT Bertrand out of Notre Dame. Consensus wise, he's outside the top 10. Both the two guys that you have at this spot at 4 and 5 are just a little outside consensus in terms of the top 10. But what's to like about Bertrand? He's got quick trigger and reaction. I'm pulling this straight from Billy Marshall. He had a great tackle in the Shrine Bowl. You see it again when Notre Dame played USC this past year. He tackled the running back and Caleb Williams at the same exact time. He's just a guy that's just going to make the reaction, makes highlight after highlight play in the run game. A lot to like about him. He sounds very intelligent, knows what he's supposed to do. I think he can definitely get better. What are elements of his game that you think he needs to work on in order to take his game to the next level?
Well, what he needs to work on, and this is going to be ironic because I talk about hitters. I think he needs to be more physical, especially as a run fitter. I think he's a good tackler, but I think coming down into the backfield, he can do a better job of just like banging with the offensive lineman and going after the ball carrier. But what I really like about him is his. I think the three guys that we talked about, or more so Colston and Cooper, they're more key, like play what's in front of you. What I like about Bertrand is he can actually cover a good bit of the field. I think he can like be a I don't know how to put like an advantage nickel to where like when they have two tight ends on the field, you don't need to bring in a third safety. I think he can go out and cover one of the tight ends. I think he is like a good enough mover and like rangy enough to go across the field. A lot of linebackers can't do that at the college level, or most of them can at the college level, and a lot of them can't do it at the NFL level. But if you watch things like the USC game, like you talked about, he was doing that and kind of disrupting what Caleb Williams was able to do because some day or some plays he would come down and like you talked about, tackle both him and the running back. That alone should put him in the top five of most people's boards. But he could also drop into coverage throughout that game and line up over, like spy the QB and then drop back. So it's like, okay, there were four down or there were five down. Now it's four down and stuff like that. Mess with the QB's head. And I do think he also has value as a blitzer, 2.5 sacks this year. But I really like him. His ability to cover across the field is something I also value in linebackers, and I think he's really good
What's
at that.
What's interesting about Bertrand is he talked about in an interview like how much he's trying to like with eye discipline is acknowledge the quick game, see what's going on there, and then be able to drop back to your spot. And that just attests to exactly what you said. He's very rangy. He knows how to get back. He knows how to make the reads that he needs to, and that'll be cool to see if he can excel in that. I like that you brought up the fact that he needs to just hit a little bit harder. So hopefully, working with guys like Jewel and Shaq Thompson, he gets a little bit more of that oorah or oof in his game. Comes out of Penn State. So Penn State has a couple of decent prospects coming out this year. He's behind two of the edge rushers and Lou Fasciano, the offensive tackle that you have as number two at that position. So last guy on this list, we have Curtis Jacobs. Oh, no. I don't know what I'm talking about. Bertrand came out of
Bertrand's
Notre
from
Dame.
Notre Dame,
Yes,
and
Curtis
Jacobs is
Jacobs
Penn State. Yeah.
Curtis Jacobs, the next guy that we're talking about, is out of Penn State. So everything I talked about applies to Curtis Jacobs, not Bertrand. Penn State has produced the most linebackers since 1967 with 64. With him being drafted, it would make him the 65th linebacker. So pretty cool kind of stat to know about Penn State and just what they've been able to produce since kind of the Super Bowl era. He's another off-ball linebacker with great instincts. What do you like about his game?
There are some things, college to pro kind of farm system draft, or whatever you want to call it, that you don't doubt. Like you can't doubt Ohio State receivers, you can't doubt Iowa linemen and tight ends, and you can't really doubt Penn State linebackers either. I was talking with one of my buddies about a month ago, and just looking at Penn State's recruiting class, and I'm like, man, they always get all the linebackers, and they're the linebacker school. They're LBU, and I think Curtis Jacobs is going to be another strong linebacker out of that program. Like I talked about with Bertrand, he's able to line up and cover tight ends across the field, not just seams or anything. He can get crossers and stuff like that. He can also line up and play spy on QBs. I thought he did a good job against was Kyle McCord in the Ohio State game and doing that. good speed, rangy, good tackler. My main thing with him is he has a lot of trouble getting off of blocks, and it's apparent in the run game. He's gonna have to be able to be more active with his hands or hands and arms at the next level. Like swiping offensive linemen or fullback arms to get off of him and make the tackle. But I like what he's able to do along the back end of the defense.
Awesome. Yeah, I think this is a guy that if he's there, kind of at those pick 101, maybe even at 141, that's a guy that you want to bring in again, adding as much young depth behind Shaq and Josie Jewell. I think would be perfect. Those are obviously going to be your two starters, but having guys that can play special teams, that can get after the ball, especially with some of the new kickoff rules. And speaking of the new kickoff rules, Laviska Chenault, who we talked about with a comp with Malachi Corley and even Mingo, he signed with the Seahawks today. And it's very interesting with those new kickoff rules, a guy that's as explosive as he is to be kind of in that wide receiver room with Tyler Lockett, JSN, DK Metcalf, even Jason. Is it Boba? No, it's what is his
Bobo,
name?
Jake Bobo.
Jake Bobo, not Jason. So Jake Bobo. So like it's that seems more interesting. I like that. I like what the Seahawks are doing with Mike McDonald, and I'm really excited to see the offense that gets put in with Ryan Grubb from Washington. So we'll see how all that plays out. Do you have any other notes that you want to talk about in terms of the linebackers? I had one question for you in regards to Cedric Gray out of Chapel Hill. A lot of people are really, really high on him, have him as like a top 5 linebacker. And on your list, you graded 13 linebackers. He ranks 13th for you. Why is he so low? What is he missing in his game that you think is going to be a detriment to him translating at the next level?
So I watched 3 games for him: South Carolina, App State, Minnesota. And in those three, the notes that I wrote were not the most sound tackler, needs to be more physical, both tackling and in blocking, or like getting off of blocks, and is not a big coverage asset. And so to me, and granted, in the other 9 games, and because I didn't watch a ton of like live Chapel Hill games this year, in the other 9 games, he could have proved me wrong there. But from what I saw, if you're not going to be the best in short area coverage, and if you're going to try to make arm tackles a lot of the time instead of wrapping up with form tackles or being physical as a run fitter as a linebacker, you're going to have to improve in one of those areas if you want to be moved up higher. It's like the way I look at it, Jeremiah Trotter, who I believe is the sixth linebacker on my list. He's a great run fitter, classic run fitter, but he's not a great coverage linebacker, and that big detriment. And he doesn't bring a ton of value as a rusher or a blitzer either. So having that kind of detriment sets him back outside of the top 5. The top 5 guys I listed, I think they have like holistic games. Like obviously Peyton Wilson's great at everything, and Bertrand's great in coverage, and he's not a terrible run fitter, but he's good at it. He's okay at it. But to be able to have holistic games and not a ton of weaknesses is what put these guys in my top 5. For me, Cedric Gray, I guess I can go back and rewatch, but he needs to be a better tackler at the next level.
I like the point that you make, and this is across the board with guys that grade film. They aren't always watching every single game. A lot of people have been on Kirk Benkirk, and rightfully so. He watched one Drake May game, arguably one of his worst games against NC State, and he passed judgment on the kid. When you turn on the rest of Drake May's tape and you're seeing what he does, he's a lot more well-rounded player than what it would make the seem in your worst game. And so that's one of those things that, depending on the games different film analysts watch, they're going to have a perception of a guy that may not be accurate of his full body of play.
And
Everybody has a bad game. So yeah, I completely get that.
and first of all, with QBs, you should be watching as many games as possible. Just
Exactly.
from this year, I had 7 from Drake May, and number 2, NC State was Drake May's far and away worst game. So
Yep.
when I'm not sure if he didn't know that, or maybe he did, and he was selecting that game on purpose to fit his own ranking or agenda purpose or anything like that. I think that's a bad practice, and I'm obviously guilty of that. Only having seen 3 games of Cedric Gray, I don't have obviously, getting your hands on NCAA All 22 is not an easy task, and I did not have a ton of games for Cedric Gray there. But hopefully, in the future, college all 22 is going to be available to everybody instead of the NCAA locking it down for no reason whatsoever. But yeah, in the future, hopefully everybody's able to watch all their games from this year and a couple from the previous year, just to get a good grasp on what the player did as a whole body of work in their most recent season. But with that in mind, hopefully Cedric Gray proves me wrong. I want every player to prove me wrong as far as my rankings, but we are a perfect takes podcast, so we got to get our takes off as we approach the 1 hour mark. And I'm gonna cheat on this one a little bit. I kind of had some bold ones earlier in the draft, like the draft section we've been doing. But my perfect take is there's not going to be a linebacker in the first round. And when I say linebacker, I mean off-ball linebacker. Obviously, Dallas Turner, Jared Verse, Leatu Latu. Obviously, they're all going in the first round. Chop Robinson could also go in the first round. Those are outside backers or edge rushers. I hate how there's a distinction between outside linebacker, defensive end. Just call them all edge rushers. That'll make it all easier. There will not be any linebackers in the first round.
How come? I like that. The only guy that I think has the pedigree to do so is Peyton Wilson, and that's if a team feels comfortable enough with the medicals. The Eagles got battered from a linebacker standpoint, and they're known to take premium positions. But if they think his medical is clear and they think he's that kind of caliber player, I think he'd be a great plug and play there. I think there's a couple other teams in the 20s that could benefit from a linebacker, but I think overall that take is correct. My take is that I don't think the Panthers draft either of the two linebackers that we have visits with in both Peyton Wilson and Edgar and Cooper. I think they're going to be gone by pick 65. I think they're top 50 prospects. So unless we trade back towards the end of the second with either pick 33 or 39, I don't see us grabbing either one of those guys. Now, Dan Morgan could definitely prove me wrong. He's definitely eyeing Peyton Wilson and Edgar and Cooper. You wouldn't bring those guys in if you didn't. And that's something that also to keep in mind as fans of any team is that the guys that got brought in, a lot of those guys end up getting drafted by the team. And the reason why is that they were impressed with everything they saw on film, everything they saw at the combine, and they want another meeting with a guy to make sure that he checks off all the boxes. Because at the end of the day, what's going on when you draft these players is you're making a lot of these guys multimillionaires. And you want to make sure before you sign them to that big check that they're going to fit in your culture, that they're going to play the brand of football that you want to play that season and moving forward. So just something to kind of keep in mind as we're approaching the draft and how impactful it is to kind of keep track of these top 30 visits. So with that, we are wrapped up with this episode of Purrfect Takes. We will catch you guys next Tuesday. You can follow us on Twitter at perfect_takes. You can find us on YouTube, Spotify, Apple. We'll get video hopefully up around the draft season. Still working on some of those kinks. I think a lot of it has to do that I work a lot off a laptop, so I don't have the CPU or the computer speed to run some of the softwares that I'm looking to run for some of that stuff. So maybe Jacob will help me out in that department. But I'm rambling now. We'll catch you guys next week. Enjoy the rest of your week, and we'll see you then.